The purpose of this session is to touch upon a classification rule that works 100% of the time when it comes to adjectives. Why is it important to classify adjectives? It's important because adjectives tend to have a different behavior when it comes to building the past, the future, and also simple phrases. So yes, if you want to say stuff like happy guy or was happy or will be happy, you will have to take grammar in consideration because it will depend on the adjective we are dealing with. So what's the deal with these adjectives? The deal with this is the following. Classic textbooks tend to classify adjectives in two categories, the ones that end in the hiragana I and all others. And this is a very neat tool because these work around 97% of the time. But yes, there is 3% of the time where this rule will need some extra complexity, and this is what I will be covering in this session. So if you're a nerd and you want to find a logical explanation to pretty much everything you're encountering, then this video is made for you. A few words about me. My name is Renata and I'm here to help you make sense of Japanese language. So let's get into it. In order to illustrate my point, I picked two adjectives which coincidentally mean the same thing. They both mean beautiful, kirei and utsukushi. And as you could see, they both end in the hiragana I. However, there is a caveat, because even if they both end in the hiragana I, they will not behave in the similar way. Let me show you. Let's first see how we say beautiful woman. If you want to use kirei, you would say kirei na onna. If you want to use utsukushi, you would say utsukushii onna. And pretty much you see that there is an extra na when it comes to using kirei, right? Now let's see a different structure. What if we want to say the woman was beautiful? If we want to use kirei, we would say onna wa kirei deshita. If we want to use utsukushi, we would say onna wa utsukushikatta desu. Pretty different, right? And let's see the third one. How will we say the woman will be beautiful? If we want to use kirei, we will say onna wa kirei ni narimasu. And if we want to use utsukushi, we will say onna wa utsukushiku narimasu. I'm pretty sure you noticed that these work pretty differently, even if both end in the hiragana I. And yes, these are one of the few times when this classification rule needs an extra complexity, but luckily there is a logical explanation to that, and I will touch upon it on the next slide. In this slide, you can see some examples where the adjectives do end in the hiragana I, yet they do not classify as adjectives that end with the hiragana I. Why is that? The reason is that these are not original Japanese words. What do I mean by that? These are Japanese words of Chinese origin. In order for you to understand this, I want you to think of words in English that are of Latin origin. Even if words such as conclusions, famous, or generation are English words, these are not authentic, so to say, Anglo-Saxon words, because these come from Latin. For example, conclusion comes from the word conclusio, or famous comes from the word famosus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And generation comes from the word generatio. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but you understand the idea. Now, the issue is that Japanese works the same way because Chinese language played pretty much the same role in Asia as of what Latin played in Europe. What do I mean by that? Words such as kirei, yume, fume are words that even Chinese these days, if they look at them, they understand. So when it comes to kirei, for example, if Chinese look at the kanji kirei, they would read it as chiri, and they will understand beautiful. They will not read it as kirei, but they will read it as chiri. Also when it comes to yume, Japanese people would read it yume, Chinese people would read it yoming. The same thing for fume. Japanese people read it fume, Chinese people would read it buming. So these are those kind of words which are part of Japanese language but are of Chinese origin. And in this case, whether or not they end in the hiragana I, they will by default be classified in the other category from a grammatical perspective. So as I said earlier, this is the classification rule which is conventionally used and works 97% of the time. If you want to make a classification rule that works 100% of the time, the first category are the ones that end in the hiragana I and they are of Japanese origin. If they end in the hiragana I and they are of Chinese origin or pretty much any other language, then by default they will be in the other category. And if you add this one extra complexity, then this rule theoretically should work 100% of the time. So just as a wrap up, words of Chinese origin that end with a hiragana i, such as kirei, yume, or fume, even if they end in a hiragana i, they will classify as other category. That means that if you want to use them, you would use this pattern and not this pattern, okay? And also another trap, which I find it relevant, there are many times words that end in the Roman i, but not in the hiragana i. Words such as benri, genki, or daisuki. The origin of these words doesn't matter. As long as they end in the Roman i and not in the hiragana i, these qualify as the other category. That means that we would use this set of rule and not this one, okay? So just to wrap up, there is a classification rule for adjectives that works 97% of the time, which is pretty nice and neat and zero complexity. And if you want to have a classification rule that works 100% of the time, you need to think of the first category that end in a hiragana i and are of Japanese origin. Just to say a few words on that, I've learned Japanese like 10 years ago as a foreign language like you, and I've never been thought of this small issue, yet I ended up classifying the adjectives correctly. So this is not a must understand aspect of Japanese language. This is more like if you are really curious how the language works, I found an explanation and I thought I would share it with you. However, if you intend to prioritize simplicity over 100% accuracy, please go ahead, because as I said, these are rare cases where the classification rule needs extra complexity. So feel free to ignore it and go ahead with the simple classification rule, because that will work as well. And that makes it for this lesson, everyone. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you in my next lessons. Have a great day.